Welcome to the decision session for Executive Member for Transport, Tuesday 21st of June 2022. The first item I have is declarations of interests. I have no declarations of interest other than perhaps to just note that item 7 relates to Fishgate Ward, but I don't live there, so I don't see that as prejudicial. The second item is the minutes of a meeting of May the 17th, 2022, which I have here, and I'm happy to sign those as a correct record of the meeting. Thank you, Robert. Which brings me to the third item, is public participation, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 speakers, I think, extant. The first speaker is ringing in, so remote, and that's Flick Williams relating to city centre access. So is Flick on the line?
Good morning.
Good morning, we can hear you if you'd like to start when you're ready.
So now we get to the tricky part, the removal of other vehicles from the foot streets. I've watched the video of the Customer and Corporate Services Scrutiny Committee multiple times, and certain aspects remain as opaque now as they were last November. Councillor Crawshaw, in the chair, asked the Director of Transport multiple times as to why, if other vehicles were easier to remove and blue badge holders harder, the exclusion was to be done in that order. I still don't know the answer, but in light of this hidden consultation, I can hazard a guess. You fear the pushback from businesses in the city far more than you think you have to worry about opposition from disabled people. Continuing to allow businesses vehicular access only serves to underline the discrimination against blue badge holders. But I suspect that just as late running was enough to get a delivery vehicle through the barriers during the Christmas market last year, there will be exemption permits aplenty for businesses with the right connections. After all, you can't even manage to keep straight what the reason for vehicle exclusion is, sometimes counter-terror, then protecting outdoor dining and back again. But then you have the audacity to take money from a Toyota dealer to plonk SUVs on St Sampson's Square as a sales promotion where blue badge holders used to park, and taking away benches, whilst all the while proclaiming yourselves an age-friendly city that cares about the climate emergency. It is futile to look for coherence and consistency where none exists. And then elsewhere on today's agenda, we have the progress report from Active Travel. The somewhat misnomered Bright Sparks communications team, who are so ableist, they managed to produce a promotional video that not only omitted to show any visibly disabled people, not wheeling, not walking with assistance dogs, nor boarding a bus via the ramp, then they accompany it with lyrics of "you have your whole life ahead of you and don't feel so old," whilst failing to include anybody visibly over 40 against a backdrop of a global pandemic that at the time of its release was killing just under 1,000 people a week. So I do hope you are happy with the £24,000 budget for that. Your report heralds it as sophisticated messaging. Really? All it's done is tell disabled people that their movement doesn't matter to you. Complaints about it did not see it removed, so one can only conclude this authority is proud of the ableism and the ageism it trumpets, and is happy with its vision of a city socially cleansed of all disabled and older people. So thank you for handing us that. Perhaps we'll all be watching it together soon in court. Thank you.
Thank you for your contributions, which we'll consider when we get to that item. My second speaker is Councillor Waters, who has something to say on 5, 8 and 9, I believe. When you're ready.
Yes, thank you, Chair. 3 items, so I'll only be brief on them. The replacement street lighting column. Of course, the city centre should not be cheapened by having a steel column replacement. And whilst I welcome the commitment to repairing the damaged cast iron column, there are a few questions that need to be asked. Given one reason for repair is the history of the column in being cast in York, so why haven't capable York firms been approached to carry out the repair, or at the very least give a quote? I believe that the full cost of repair, or as I suggested, sourcing a cast iron replica, should be forthcoming from the wagon driver's insurance, but the quoted cost and circumstances give me some doubt. Presumably, had the knockdown column been retrieved by the council in one piece, it would have only required minimal repair to one fracture, instead of which the column was chopped into pieces by a council operative, thereby creating a huge repair job. Who authorised this additional and ultimately costly destruction? As for the list of speed reduction requests, I'm amazed to see the A1079 Dunniton request come to this meeting in this format. It's completely pointless. What was requested was a continuous 40-mile-an-hour speed limit for the full length of the A1079 from Grimston Roundabout to the Kexby East Riding boundary, removing all anomalies and hopefully standardisation and reduction of signage. I'm equally amazed to see that a request made 2 years ago to reduce from 40-mile-an-hour to 30-mile-an-hour a short section of Hull Road from Grimston Roundabout heading the other way into York, right where the crossings are to Archbishop Aldgate School, has been seemingly lost by officers. Not often I'm lost for words, but I almost am with the Osbaldwick Lane parking petition response from officers. Parking, blocking footpaths in this location was actively facilitated by this council, removing the verge some years ago to create a sea of tarmac. If none of you remember, I suggested creating planting holes and a line of trees planted when this tarmacking was first proposed. Now you lot suggest putting bollards in to stop parking that you encouraged. No doubt, at the time, to facilitate the extra parking demands of all the student HMOs on the street. It's all so crazy that you really couldn't make any of this up. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you much. We'll consider those when we come to those items. So the next speaker I have is Andrew Morrison on item 5.
Thank you and good morning. I'm here to talk about item 5, the historic lamppost. Civic Trust would strongly urge the executive member to decide in favour of repair and reinstatement of the original lamppost rather than replacing it with a modern replacement, and also seeking full compensation from the delivery driver's insurance company. That lamppost is the last of its kind in the city. It's part of a 1905 series of lampposts put across the city, backed up by York's own power station. A unique piece of the industrial heritage of the city. And actually, as the city becomes more genteel and gentrified, actually that industrial heritage is being lost. So to put that lamppost back, fully repaired, would be, I think, a really important thing to do. We wouldn't perhaps be talking about this if it was the Roman column outside the Minster, which in some ways has less of a history. The Civic Trust established that in 1971. So, you know, that lamppost has actually stood there for nearly 70 years more. So actually, I think it should be repaired and reinstated fully. Obviously, there is a cost difference here, and the Civic Trust, which I represent, would be happy to support the council in meeting the difference between those two costs if it came to it, as a funder of last resort, but also perhaps either from our own reserves or spearheading a fundraising campaign to do it. We think the lamppost is that important. It may also be the most photographed lamppost in York, positioned at the top end of Minster Yard with that photogenic view of the Minster behind it. So removing it and replacing it with a modern replica actually will take a fundamental part of our tourist economy and also our cultural life away. And it'll be a further denudation of the streetscape itself. So we strongly urge the executive member to make the decision to repair and reinstate. And whilst I've got the opportunity, may I quickly throw 30 seconds in on item 10. Actually, the Civic Trust supports item 10, the DEFRA Air Quality last mile delivery report, as very good news. And we strongly urge the executive member to go with the recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contributions, which we'll consider when we get to those items. My next speaker is Councillor Melly who has something to say on items 4, 10 and 11, I believe. When you're ready, morning.
On agenda item 4, yet again, you're looking at a traffic regulation order for the city centre to limit non-essential vehicle journeys that still excludes blue badge holders. It is still discrimination and it is still unacceptable. But it's curious that even with these further access restrictions, certain York Council vehicles will still be allowed access because they haven't adapted to the pedestrianisation, despite having had 2 years to do so. Blue badge holders, by contrast, were forced to stop their essential car journeys almost overnight. On agenda item 11, 3 months ago, Micklegate residents asked whether there were plans to look at introducing parking charges on Knavesmire Road, and you denied it. But here it is. Is this yet another isolated scheme, or is it part of a wider transport strategy? Because residents have contacted me with concerns about knock-on effects of this scheme on the amenity of residential streets in my ward of Holgate. What will prevent people from parking in streets in Holgate with unrestricted parking instead of using the park and ride? If this scheme will in some way funnel people onto the park and ride, then does it include improved capacity, especially for wheelchair users, or will they yet again be the ones to be disproportionately impacted by a transport project? On agenda item 10, I'm glad to see transport finally look at tackling freight movements rather than just the movement of people. Freight accounts for 1/3 of all transport carbon emissions, and van traffic has doubled in the 25 years leading up to 2019. So the council looking at alternatives is long overdue. However, some of the proposed timescales maybe need clarifying. The pilot project plan on page 173 of the papers says the pilot will operate from September 2022, but this only gives 3 months from now to be ready to start the pilot, which doesn't quite seem feasible. The proposal only seems to be looking at carbon emissions and air quality. These are obviously huge and important benefits of reducing the use of heavy goods vehicles, and I appreciate that it's the focus of the DEFRA funding, but I fear that if the scheme isn't designed to achieve other potential benefits, then they won't be accomplished and the scheme's success will be limited. For example, the benefits for small businesses that participate and the reduced impact of heavy delivery vehicles on the cost of pavement repairs to keep them tidy and accessible. Other cities are ahead of York on this, so I hope you'll learn from other places that have operated these sorts of distribution hubs to see what has worked well, what hasn't, and why, and how issues have been resolved. For example, the practicalities of operators working together is something that's still to be resolved. And this is something that other last mile distribution hubs had struggled with as well, such as in Bristol. This proposed scheme seems to only be for delivery to city centre businesses and not collections from city centre businesses, yet a system that has pickups is key to reducing vehicle journeys, ensuring that businesses get the full benefits and that the scheme is as successful as possible. Small businesses don't seem to have been included in the project so far, but their participation will be essential. Local independent businesses should be central to this local scheme, and the benefits to them beyond the externalities of the improved air quality need to be clearer. For example, the benefits of multiple deliveries being consolidated at the hub into one delivery, and the same for outgoing goods, such as for online orders. I support this trial in principle, but I feel it will be a missed opportunity unless more work is done on realising the potential benefits. Thanks.
Thank you very much for those comments, which we'll consider when we get to that item. So the final speaker, I believe, is Andrew Mortimer, speaking on item 8, which is the Osbaldwick Lane parking petition. When you're ready.
Excellent. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I want to speak in support of the recommendation on item 8 to do a review of the parking and use of the footpath in the Osbaldwick Lane area. I gave you a couple of photographs just before the start of the meeting just to highlight some of the problems that in particular users of the footpath experience. It's an all year round problem, and it happens across the whole length of Osbaldwick Lane. The photographs I gave you actually are at the Town Hall Lane end of it, not the school end. As far as the school goes, we didn't include any requests for anything in that area because all that's really needed there is enforcement of the current restrictions, which are fairly comprehensive in that area. I could just comment on a couple of the officers' report items. Under item 8, I think I'd just like to stress that local residents are kind of looking for the parking to be organised rather than reduced. So the option to kind of put bollards to stop parking is probably not one that would actually meet the needs of the petitioners. So it's a case of if people do park on what was the grass verge, as Councillor Waters mentioned, it needs to be done in a way that's organised and doesn't clash with people trying to cross the road or use the footpath or get on and off the bus. I agree that safe crossing points would be a good thing. At the moment, I think the only kind of tactile crossing is right at the very top of Tang Hall Lane end, and it's that close to Tang Hall Lane itself. More often than not, there's vehicles parked on it trying to turn on and off the lane because it can get quite busy there. So if there were some designated crossing points further down near the bus stops, I think that would be a very good option to look at and would help people use the road better. But the key thing is getting by, and as you can see in the photographs, we end up with cars parked on the footpath, bins waiting for collection, and it becomes near enough impossible for anybody other than a solo pedestrian to squeeze by. And in fact, the car that was parked on the photograph I show you there, we had to get the traffic enforcement team out because literally you could not get past the footpath. It was that blocked. And again, it's a regular occurrence. I would agree with the comment at 9 is that the residents are not looking for a residents parking scheme. I think I agree with that. I think it's just looking at how we can organise it and try and make sure that any parking that does take place is done in a way that doesn't cause the obstructions that I mentioned. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for your contributions. We'll consider when we come to that item. So that concludes the public speakers this morning. So I move on to item 4, which is the city centre exemption consultation on page 9. So, wants to
I'll open up on this one.
and in responding, perhaps if you can reference the logic behind the sequences of the orders, which was one of the points from public speaker.
So, as you'll remember, in November, the counter-terrorism police advised executives that the city centre should be vehicle-free and blue light only as far as possible. And the decisions that were taken in November, in effect, defined the location of where those exemptions would apply. So where the hostile vehicle mitigation measures would actually go. The most difficult consideration in making that decision was obviously the blue badge access and where blue badges would be excluded from. Because that defined, so the blue badge access defines the location, that's why we did it in that order. The bit that follows on then is removing all the other exemptions, which is a lot less sensitive and didn't drive the decision making. That's why we've done it in that order.
So just to be clear, what we're saying is that the widespread engagement with disabled community and those who depend on a blue badge for accessing the city centre, that was the priority in terms of the consultation and discussion before moving on to these.
Yes, we identified that was going to be the most difficult part of the decision making very early on.
Okay.
So the TRO that's been consulted upon follows on from that November executive and is about removing the other vehicles as far as possible from the city centre. So this is things like deliveries to the banks, delivery vehicles, etc. So this removes all the other non-essential access to the city centre. Responding to one of the, I think it was Councillor Melly's comment that some vehicle access needs to be retained. At the moment, we are actively working with Make It York on the market, but at the moment, the bin store in the market needs to be serviced 3 times a day during Foot Street hours. We are looking at that. We're working actively with Make It York, but at the moment, the bin store just isn't big enough for us not
To last,
yeah,
to
to
the
last
end of
the
period.
Foot Street hours. So we need to get into empty that bin, otherwise we'll have rubbish piling up in the city centre. I'll hand over to Darren to go through the TRO responses.
Good morning, Chair.
Morning.
So, as James mentioned, the TRO consultation went out on the 10th of March. We informed all properties, residents and businesses in city centre markets and statutory consultees and some other organisations associated with the city centre. We received 9 responses to the consultation. In effect, this consultation won't change anything for the residents because currently they can't access between 10:30 and 5 anyway. And majority of the business is the same as well. There was a few, it was to remove some of the minor exemptions that for I think the fish market and things like security vans and fewer. But I say from the representations, we've got 2 from businesses outside the area. So there will actually be no impact on them because they can still come and go as they please. They were just concerned that they're on the access road into Goodham Gate and thought it might have an impact. The remaining 7 some of those representations wanted just full access for businesses and residents at all times. That would be a complete step back from where we've been previously. And there was some confusion over the exemptions that would be allowed, and people wanted more clarity on that. As part of their objection, they felt that these exemptions and waivers were just issued to whoever wanted them, but they will be run in line with the HVM measures, and there's policies and protocols that will be brought forward with them. There's a brief paragraph on that in the report about the sort of information we'll be asking from drivers prior to any approval being sought, and we are asking that notice is given. As I say, that those procedures are still being ironed out as part of the HVM measures. So there's not 100% clarity on the time limit that they will be required.
So this is the reference in paragraph 22 to the details that are required for an access request.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the report was also asking for us to go to consultation with utilities, so we can amend the street gazetteer, which will reduce utilities access into the city centre as well. So they won't just be able to go in when if they feel emergency, they'll have to come to us to get that approval. So it'll amend their access rights into the centre.
So that's making the information available more generally to any utility operator. So they won't just turn up and then start a process of trying to
currently
work out how they get in. If
they ascertain there's an emergency in the centre that they could turn up and give us the council 2 hours notice. 2 hours after they've started work. This will give us more control over what vehicles go in. So they would have to contact the council straight away, say we need to go in as an emergency, and we can start that formal process with them.
And obviously in physical terms, once the HVM measures are in place, then obviously it's much easier to police that than it has been historically. We actually have to control that process.
I think just to finish off, the report doesn't propose a change to the decisions that will be made on blue badge access. So those decisions were made in November. And just to come back to the recommendations at para 5 that we are asking you to consider, as it's to make the traffic regulation order as advertised, to continue the sort of engagement and communication with residents and businesses about the way the city centre will operate, and as Dan has just talked about updating the street gazetteer, national street gazetteer.
Okay, so just for clarity on that, the process once this is approved is that any emergency, well, obviously emergency repairs would still need to contact the council with the information about who it is, why they need to be in the area and so on, and that as quickly as possible. Just one specific point, I think there was one representation from a resident who suggested it would be useful, presumably this would be something fairly straightforward to do, to make sure that businesses and residents within the city centre have a sort of clear about a contact number and a procedure if they need to make emergency repairs, or if they're landlords for a property that needs a pipe fixing or whatever.
Second recommendation, which is about communications to the residents and businesses about the way it will operate.
Okay. And just for the sake of completeness, there's also, as you say, there was a representation from at least one organisation. I think there was a representation of Civic Trust that was on the basis that we were reconsulting on blue badge, which is obviously clearly not the case. So this decision is moving on from it. She's actually implementing one of the recommendations or one of the details of what was agreed by the whole executive in November.
That's correct.
Thank you. So, so just make a few comments if that's okay. So as the report indicates, the November decision of the executive acknowledged the police anti-terror guidance that we must reduce vehicle access to an absolute minimum into the crowded pedestrianised streets. And this is part of that process. As acknowledged in this report, we still have the urgent work, which is we've discussed briefly, to eliminate the need for bin lorries to empty litter bins during those hours, working with partners where it's their responsibility, such as Make It York and the markets. Amongst other actions post-COVID, I do also hope that we can continue the work that we did previous to COVID to promote reusable cups and refillable water bottles to minimise the amount of disposable containers that are going into those bins, which then lead to them needing to be emptied on such a regular basis. This can be part of the solution, helping to reduce our waste disposal, as well as the need for such regular emptying. And then I think it's also just acknowledging that, not for a decision today, but in addition to this measure, the council is continuing to work on addressing the needs for more seating, such as that has been recently provided by York Bid in locations such as St Sampson Square, and the drop curbs on streets that have separate pavements, and also blue badge parking, which we're constantly looking at and working towards improving. And it's perhaps worth noting that on current plans, Castlegate will become available again for blue badge parking from the end of September, the end of the current provision for payment cafes and so forth. As approved in November, we're also working on a plan that I'm keen to deliver for a trial of a shuttle bus through the foot streets this year to assess the benefits that might bring to address the accessibility issues that have been referred to. So we are doing everything that we can, and I think it's important to stress that we are very keen to work with blue badge holders, their families, anybody who's affected by the change in the regulations, to try and optimise the safety for everybody within the city centre, but provide the access that is needed for people with disabilities. So I'm happy to approve the recommendations and look forward to work to help to build on the outdoor experience, while also enabling everyone to safely access the city centre. So I'm happy to approve the recommendations in this report, acknowledging all the representations that we've had. Thank you. So that moves me on to the next item, which is the lamp column. This is York. This is the sort of issues that we have to deal with. So this is a historic lamp column which has been damaged. I don't know who wants to. I'll
cover this item. So, as you'll be aware, reported in the press was the vehicle which reversed into the historic lamp column while I was making deliveries early one morning. The column was damaged, it collapsed to the street. This report considers whether we should repair or replace it. Our normal approach would be to replace it with a modern replica, but as you'll see from the annex, there is a heritage argument for repairing this item. The approach, if you do choose repair, what we're recommending is a slight relocation of it and protection with some bollards to prevent it being hit again in the future, which reduces the risk of a collision. And the reason we're so keen to do that is a cast column is much more likely to crack and collapse, whereas a steel column tends to bend when hit at low speed. The insurance case will take some time to settle. The council will vociferously chase the insurance company for the full cost of repair. And I think that principle applies if you think about other insurance cases of historic items being damaged. They have a higher residual value, therefore that logic stacks up. However, there remains a small risk that the insurance settlement won't cover the full cost, which is why we brought the decision forward to yourself. But as you'll note from the Civic Trust today, they've offered to help with that cost differential should the worst happen and the insurance company doesn't cover the full cost. So the recommendation is to repair the cast column and relocate it to reduce the risk.
Thank you. Well, certainly very much appreciate the interest and the contributions from the Civic Trust and other members of the York community. As Andrew explained, this does appear to be the last survivor of this particular model, which was actually made in York as part of the initial white heat of electrification of lighting around this city about a century ago. So although it's like a lot of things that they become valuable as more and more of their other examples disappear, and this would appear to be the last of its type, which is as an important part of our industrial heritage, as you've heard. So I do also want to mention that this does reflect the urgent work, which is the focus of item 10 about last mile delivery and looking for solutions that remove the need for large vehicles in our tight historic streets, with clear risks to the historic fabric, as well as all the thousands of visitors who come here every day to experience our ancient city centre. It is somewhat ironic that the unique nature of this lamp has not been more widely recognised until now, which and thankfully the incident didn't involve any injury, but clearly it's important to balance heritage with cost and safety for the general public. And I think that the recommendation you've got before us does do that. And it would seem that option B2 strikes that correct balance, along with continuing work to reduce the level of delivery vehicle activity in Stonegate. So I'm happy to support the officer recommendation, and if necessary, once the work has been done, just check on the lighting levels and see if there's any supplementary lighting is needed. But obviously we won't be able to tell that until the lamp has been repaired and has been located slightly away from the highway edge, which is why it succumbed to the incident that we've experienced. So I'm happy to approve the recommendation. So that moves us on to the next item, iTravel update from page 81.
So I'll just do a very quick introduction. So for those that don't know, iTravel is the programme of work around behaviour change in terms of delivering the sort of strategy element of local transport plan and moving towards active travel and sustainable travel options. So would you like to, Duncan will sort of take you through the report in more detail.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The iTravel team is a team of 6 people in the council, and we encourage people to change how they travel to walking, cycling, bus, that kind of thing, to help the environment, health, congestion. And we work alongside the road safety team who provide all the cycle training. So this is a report that summarises all the travel behaviour change stuff going on in York, or that went on last year. What strikes me in this report is that we've really got things that we can build on now. So there are particular schemes where we feel we can take these on to the following years and really build our ability to change behaviour. Things like better points. It's a scheme where people can download an app and be rewarded for their sustainable travel. And that's something we think we can carry on. Walking Festival, we did our second year, and that I think will build and build as well. So as people come to recognise the event, they'll want to come back. The website, I think, is a lot more refined than it used to be, a lot more helpful. So I'm really pleased with the website, the iTravel website. We've also started to do more digital resources, like the cycle route videos, where you can actually see what a cycle route looks like on YouTube, you can, from a bird's eye point of view. And then you've got things like eCycle Switch, which we got particular funding for, where we're providing electric bikes through local bike shops, which is a new thing for us, providing trials of bikes through local bike shops. So you go to a bike shop, try an electric bike for a few days. If you like it, you can buy it. And the government specifically wants to fund electric bike schemes. So that's gone really well, and we can do that for another year this year. I've got some money for e-cargo bikes as well, providing a couple for St Nick's, one for Brunswick and one for the council. These are bikes that are pedal assisted and you can deliver bulky items with. And the last thing to mention is the Active Travel Fund, which was mentioned in that presentation before, wasn't it? So there's been some branding produced so that we can promote the new cycle routes and walking routes coming about, like the 819 cycle route. So that branding is there to use when the campaign comes along. But I'm happy to comment on what was said about the video.
Yes, if you can do that.
Yeah, we totally got it wrong. So hands up on that. Mm-hmm. So we don't know how we missed it, but clearly there's an issue perhaps with how we perceive travel. And I was particularly disappointed because we've done so many other things in our programme in this area. So we produced a Braille walk for the Walking Festival. Adapted bikes are available on eCycle Switch. Cycle route videos featuring an adapted cycle, and we've really updated our mobility and access webpage. So we've done quite a lot in the last year. So to miss this is really disappointing. But we don't want to say there was some excuse. There's no excuse, really.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, I must confess, when I saw the video to start off, it did strike me a little bit that, you know, I can understand how these things happen when you have an external agency have their own conceptions about what is wanted, and things were done to try and get them ready for the campaign at the start of the year. But it's certainly something we do need to work more at, promoting awareness of things like the, you know, there's the bike bells have got these adapted cycles for taking old people out from elderly people's homes. There's all sorts of things that there's some specialist cycle companies in York that do a lot of work for disability adapted cycles. So, you know, we do need to raise awareness and make sure that whatever we produce is as inclusive as possible. Yeah. Moving on to the more general points in here, certainly it's very welcome to see the sort of work that you're doing. I've got a few points that I'll just make to sort of highlight, and feel free to come back if there's anything that you think needs following up. So I very much welcome this report. In particular, I think the tables on paragraphs 7 and 8 illustrate the shoestring budget in which our behaviour change and cycle promotion programme has been based for more than a decade. And I think it's particularly a credit to your staff. I know you're relatively new in the role, but over the years, the team members have put a lot of effort into raising awareness, and not least all the cycle trainers and the work that they do for future generations in schools. So I also, ironically, the 24,000 that you mentioned about promoting active travel measures, I think that is a relatively small amount, but we do need to get it right in terms of how it comes across to the public in York. And I think we do need to recognise that relatively small sums of money, if you look at the budgets that you've been working with, I think they're all under £500,000 a year, have delivered a lot within the city. And there's always more that we can do, I'm sure. Opposition councillors will be keen to draw attention to the fact that we need to be doing more. But you are doing a lot with that budget. So I just also want to point out that as an authority that's been nationally at the forefront of cycle training in schools, the report on bikeability training in your paragraph 26 is particularly welcome, with nearly 1,300 pupils getting training to level 2 last year, despite whatever constraints you were working under with access to schools and so on with post-COVID. I do think we need to continue to push further on level 3 take up. I don't know if you've got anything to comment on that. Was that down last year?
It is with the road safety team, that kind of thing. So I can take that back to them.
Okay.
So you'd like to do more of that?
Well, I'm aware that level 3 is a critical point at which quite often it comes between junior and secondary as to when people, young people get that training. But it is the level, as I understand it from my involvement, it is a level that's required to be competent and confident on major urban roads. So, it is that challenging point when young people become teenagers, may or may not be seen as cool to be continuing to cycle, with peer pressure and so on. So having that confidence is really important, I think.
Yeah.
To be able to feel that, and for their parents as well, to feel that they're going to be safe doing so. So I also wanted to acknowledge the urban skills for adults and families that is helping all sections of the community, and including, I think you've done some work with international students and refugees in different communities.
I hear that's the case. So I don't manage the team that provides the cycle training, but I think, there's a lot going on there. I think they're going well beyond the usual suspects for cycle training. So that's really good. Okay,
thank you. And obviously that is key for cheap or low cost independent travel in some communities. The plans for the coming year, I think, should serve as an indicator of the Department for Transport and the Active Travel England of just how vital this promotion work is for the success of the existing and new infrastructure, which we're bringing forward across the city, and as a mechanism for shifting more of the day-to-day movements from car to sustainable travel options. So I think this report is very welcome, acknowledging that not everybody can walk or cycle, but the more people that we do have walking and cycling, the less pressure is on the road space for everybody else. So it is a key element of our overall transport strategy, as far as I say it. Okay. So with that, I'm happy to move on to the next item, which is the Kexby Avenue. Proposed residence parking for Kexby Avenue, Arnside Place, and section of Fife Lane. So, just Darren.
Morning again. So this is a petition that was received from residents of Kexby Avenue to be included within the residence parking zone that was introduced in last September. As part of the original consultation, they were included in the consultation area, and the receipts that we got didn't indicate that there was in favour of it, and they weren't taken forward. Once the new scheme started, a petition was received from residents to ask for that decision to be overturned and them to be included due to a negative impact on the street that had been seen. As part of the consultation, we received 4 objections. One doesn't feel the need for a scheme at all. They never have an issue parking outside their house, and indicate that there's a big issue with people using the street as a cut through between Fife Lane and
Green Dykes
Green
Lane.
Dykes Lane, thank you. And then the remaining three objectors were on the timings that we're proposing, because the original consultation was 24/7, but this consultation has gone out 8 till 6, Monday to Friday, in line with the area on the other side of the street, to try and keep some consistency. And as the scheme was originally put out due to student parking attending the university, it would seem to suit those times to then reduce that risk and free up parking on an evening and weekend for.
Okay, that's fine. And just, I mean, I have considered the objections as you referred to them. There were three of them were sort of in a way wanting it to be more extensive in terms of coverage. And there was the one who didn't believe there was a particular problem other than the speeding issue. So, and the cost of the permits in this case is, as I understand, it's not an issue in the short term because of the university funding.
Yeah, the university funding
until September 24. So those are the key points. Just one other point to be clear on, I think, is the plans indicate that because of the Arnside Place being unadopted, there's a slight difference in terms of the footprint of who's eligible to the area, which is actually the restricted zone. So just wanted to be clear on that. The residents of Arnside Place will be able to get a permit or a visitor's permit. So if they,
they'll be able to
wish
apply for
to,
permits.
they obviously don't have to if they've got their own drive and so on. But
Yeah, they'll be able to apply for permits, but they won't be eligible. Anyone in Kexby Avenue won't be eligible to park on Arnside with a permit.
Yeah, that's right. So it is a little bit more complex, but it's what we have to do to work around the unadopted nature of the highway in that area. So it's quite likely that most residents won't actually want to be involved in that, but if there is an issue, then they can get a
They have the
permit
potential.
or whatever, or a permit for themselves to park there. So I do appreciate the work that's gone into this. It's never straightforward, these schemes, are they? I suppose just to put on record that I would hope if we can, that the residents will want us to try and implement this by the end of September, which is when the new term starts. So if we've got others that we can put it in with in terms of processing the order, I'm happy to approve this, having noted the objections, but if we can do what we can to make
as mentioned
forward.
about previous schemes, there's an issue with getting them on the parking system, but it's a small scheme. This might not have the same impact that others do. So
I'm putting it on record. I'm trying to make that happen, recognising you've got a lot of other schemes and orders to deal with. So we're happy to approve that item. So that takes me on to item 8, which is Osbaldwick Lane parking petition. I think perhaps it's worth noting in relation to this. We obviously heard what the residents had to say, and it does seem as though the comments from the two speakers was in line with the recommendation here. But I think do need to note that there has been a call-in, which hasn't happened yet, in relation to one of the decisions made at my last decision session. So although I've approved the minutes as correct, because they are correct what was decided at the time, and maybe some further actions following on from the call-in. So I don't know if you can suggest how we sort of manage that.
I think.
Sorry, can you put the mic on?
I think the recommendation that's before you today is that basically the transport team go away and work with the communities team to look at a solution in this location. It's not asking you to implement a solution or make a decision or make a regulation, a traffic regulation order. So I think in that sense, you are probably fine to make the decision today to do that. Obviously, officers will be at that call-in, which I think is next Monday, or it might be the Monday after. And we can take that into account when we do this piece of work with the communities team to look at a solution. The only thing I would say is there are a limited number of controls that we have as a council, and they are, and Darren can expand on this, but they are, you know, yellow lines and painting on the road, or they are residents parking. There isn't another solution to this other than physical measures. I don't know if you want to add anything, Darren.
No, that's correct. From a restricted point of view, we'd have the yellow lines, or we'd have the residents parking. These aren't what the residents are wanting. They're wanting more considerate parking by fellow residents. That's why the proposal was to look at bollards over street furniture to reduce, whether that's planters or other associated items in the future. That's what the discussions we need to have in the future.
Okay, yes, I mean, I think coming fundamentally, the involvement of all councillors is important to feedback, you know, what's behind the parking issues. If it's commuter parking associated with the university or other businesses, that's different from residents who actually live in the area not being considerate. You know, so there's different solutions depending on the time of day and the nature of the problem. And that is obviously what the recommendation suggests should be explored further before bringing forward specific proposals. So I mean, I think the fact that this is being sort of called in, basically, if we're not proposing any specific measures, then I can approve your recommendation, but with perhaps, if you want a minute, a rider that if the recommendation is subject to any changes that the call-in might want to propose, because the call-in is actually relating to some making of TRO in relation to protecting corners, if I remember rightly. So the call-in can decide whether or not those TRO should be implemented. If it decides not to implement the TROs, then obviously these other measures could be the solution instead. And obviously that's subject to the conversations next week at that call-in meeting.
Sorry, just to check, is that so if they do change something at the call-in, you're suggesting that this
would have to then
this
come back
decision
to,
wouldn't,
well, whatever
you wouldn't
follow,
then go away and talk to the communities team.
I think what we'll do is we'll take the recommendation as written. I think what Councillor De Gorn is saying is he's asking officers to be mindful of any recommendations that come out of the call-in when we do this piece of work with the communities team.
Okay,
so it's just subject to any particular recommendations that you raise as a result of that. You know, it might be, say, for example, there's a suggestion about other parties being involved in addition to ward councillors or communities team or whoever it might be. So, you know, it's just to be open, but I'm happy for that subject to the conversations next week to be taken into account. Okay. So I think then we can move on to the next item. Item 9 is the speed limits TRO amendments on page 123.
Okay, I'll just do a very quick introduction and just to respond to the comments made by Councillor Waters. So I have written to Councillor Waters just to assure him that the whole road scheme hasn't been forgotten. What's before you today is a first batch of speed traffic regulation orders, and a second batch will follow. The reason we've done that is that we've had some staff changes which have slowed the batch that member of staff who's left were working on down. What we didn't want to do was slow the whole programme down as a result of that, and have therefore brought you those that have been prepared and ready to go to you, and we'll bring that second batch as soon as they're ready. I'll hand over to Darren to talk through the report.
Just before you do that, if I could just make one or two general comments. Certainly, I very much welcome this report and the fact that I assume a lot of these will have come about as a result of either petitions or conversations from ward councillors, parish councillors, whoever. Particularly if there's going to be a second batch coming forward. I acknowledge I'm familiar with the speed management protocol and the sort of processes that we have in agreement and partnership with the police. And I welcome the fact that you have added the details on each map of the 85th percentile speeds and the mean speed, so the sort of prevailing behaviour on those stretches of road. I just think for completeness, it would probably also be useful to have information about any accident statistics, like for the last 5 years, for instance. I have, prior to this meeting, I have actually checked and looked at the items which are down under option 1, and it doesn't appear from what I could see fairly quickly looking online that there is a particular accident record to be concerned about. But, in future, I think that would be useful information as well to have alongside the average speeds, because certainly it would be something that the police would take into account deciding what enforcement action they'll take.
Yeah, that's fine. That could be added to future.
Thank you. So
I was going to propose to go through each site. Obviously, it's a report that's been brought forward through requests from residents, as you said, and ward councillors about speed issues on certain stretches of the road. So the first site is Stockton Lane. There was a request to make it to a 40 mile an hour. It's currently 60. It's over 2 kilometres long. It's lightly built up. The short sections of 30. The speeding surveys indicate that there's very little prospect of people dropping to the requested speed. So the recommendation is to take no further action here and place an advisory 40 on the bend at the south corner of the. Can you see what I mean?
Whereabouts is the actual bend? Is that
so? It's a slight bend on the southwest corner of the plan.
Right. So is that near to the box with the 60 mile an hour?
Yeah.
Okay, details.
But say that's where the speed survey data was from, that area, and obviously, as you can see, the speeds weren't in excess of 40 in the general.
And whereabouts is did you say there's a section of 30 mile an hour? Is that when you get towards
in the built up area further along the section? Yeah, so either side of where these requests are.
Right, so sort of a northeast corner and a southwest corner in effect.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a long stretch. It's hard to.
Okay. I mean, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about all of them, but I think the ones that you've recommended no action, I do sort of want to have a little bit of a consideration and look at. This one, I do think that there could be a case for some further work to consider. Certainly the suggestion about an advisory limit on the bend, which presumably is would that be just a static sign with an advisory plate
Yeah.
For the bend, same as a bend.
Yeah, it'd be a sign in the normal place, but it'd be advisory rather than the
Yeah, okay.
regulated.
But I mean, looking at are these figures, are they for a week? Or do you know what period that they use to average it over?
I'm not sure that information wasn't provided in the road safety report.
Right. I mean, it just does seem to me that the 85th percentile and the mean is well below 50. So on that basis, there could be an argument for a 50-mile-an-hour limit. But, you know, I'm happy for you to take that away and have a look at that. Just because I'm conscious this is sort of more or less as you come out of the urban area, and you know, if there's no speed restriction whatsoever, there is
we can go back and review it in the second batch that James has talked about if you want to.
Okay, yeah, I'd be happy for you to do that. I don't think I've got anything issues with the other ones, but that one, okay, as it happens, thought it was worth looking at again.
We just need to record. Sorry, we just need to record that as a decision then to
refer that back for further work on the option of a 50-mile-an-hour limit. Obviously, there's no point in doing it if it's not going to achieve the objective, but I think it's sending the signals if the residents in the area are concerned about that. And obviously, it's an all-purpose road, so there will be farm vehicles and cyclists and whoever else using it, as well as drivers. Okay, so sorry, do you want to move on to the next one then?
So the next location is the Hollies in Stockton Forest.
Okay.
This is a new development. It would have been included in the 20-mile rollout if it was in place at that point. So the recommendation is to include it now and reduce the speed to 20 an hour from 30.
So you've got an existing 20-mile on the village, which is the main road in effect, isn't it?
Yeah, that it's near the school.
Yeah.
So it's extend
So
that
it
into
probably
the development.
does look a bit nonsensical going back to 30 when you turn into the estate. Yeah. So I'm happy with that.
Next location is the A1079 Dunnington. Part of this section is 40, and then it's got 260-mile-an-hour either side. On the section closest to York, it's recommended to extend that 40-mile-an-hour.
So it's extending from A to B, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I'm happy with that. I mean, is that, presumably you've identified that as the best sight lines for the...
It takes in a couple more residential properties and it moves it quite, there's the way by with vehicle access off there. So,
I mean, my only comment would be, we don't really want to have someone come back in 6 months saying we haven't moved it far enough. You know, why didn't you take it past my house rather than past this?
Yeah, well, it goes past all the residential properties. I think the further issue that will come back is, as Council Waters suggested, that this should go all the way to the Kexby boundary.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm happy to approve that, but I suppose if it comes back in the second batch, I mean, maybe you want to consider whether we defer that to that item if it's going to be raised, whether this is appropriate before we actually implement it.
My understanding was that the Kexby Avenue had already been declined due to the rollout, but it can be reviewed if you want to, say if you want to defer it.
Well, I just think if it's, I don't know how quickly is it likely to the second batch come into it?
We have a new member of staff starting next week and they will be taking forward speed limit stuff. Okay. We haven't sort of started a time limit yet on when that would get to a decision session. We'd hopefully before the end of this calendar year, but it depends on other items on the full plan and implementation of anything through this batch and things like that.
Well, was this from the parish council, did you say?
Yeah, the parish council has the issues.
I mean, I'd be happy to delegate that to officers to have a conversation with parish council about how urgent it is. I'm just conscious I don't want to be, accused of spending money moving a sign and then 3 months later we come back and move it again.
Yeah, I mean, well, we reuse the sign. It's not a major expense in the grand scheme of things. I suppose it's whether there's an improvement by doing the works now.
Mhm. Well, I'm happy for it to go ahead now, but I think it might be as well just to check with the parish council if they're going to say, you know, we want to hold off until we've got the.
So you're happy to
approve it going ahead, but
on the condition that the parish council are happy.
that sounds right.
Okay.
So we'll go back to parish council
Yeah.
and just check.
Otherwise, you know,
So delegate
delegate
Robert, delegate it to me.
to
but
decide
we
whether
need
to go ahead or wait until the next review for the stretch beyond those. Okay. So Northfield Lane, now this is about quiet lanes, isn't it?
Yeah, this is slightly different. So quiet lane divided, minor road networks. They say there's a few, the bottom end of the road, there's a lot of horse riding and there's agricultural, but then halfway down there's an industrial estate. So it's trying to get that balance between how those two different environments are mixed. The recommendation is to advertise a reduction to 30 miles an hour to cover the full length. And then they say, look at, they'll get into the offices for the quiet lane to.
So I mean, the 85th percentile is not too far off 30, is it? It's like got 30, 37 and 31 with a mean well below 30. So you know, the speeds do seem to indicate that. And is this in this sort of illustration, is that sort of an indicative treatment for the road or on the illustration?
That is what the initial thoughts were. Yeah, obviously it might need more width service of the width of the road and stuff at different locations. So that's, yeah.
So I mean, just trying to understand how a cyclist would interpret that. Is that because technically a solid white line means that no vehicle should be crossing that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Is this taken from some traffic manual as to what is recommended for quiet lanes?
Yes, but say it wouldn't be signed because it's signed as a quiet lane. It's slightly different. But yeah, I understand what you're saying about the crossing.
You know, I mean, obviously the illustration shows sharing the space with horse riders and cyclists and pedestrians, although pedestrians, you've got a footway alongside the area that's in the picture, haven't you?
I think there's only a footpath on the north side. There's a crossing point just where you can see where the grass verge on the west side. Sorry.
So, I mean, I'm happy to agree to the actual change in terms of the speed limit. I just think there might need to be a little bit more consultation in terms of the how the area is indicated. You know, whether it's horse riders, cyclists, or whoever else might use the route.
Okay.
Is that okay? So the decision is to go ahead with the regulation in terms of 30 miles an hour, but a little bit more consultation in terms of the signing and because it is the first. It is well. It is the first quiet lane, isn't it, in York, or would be that somebody's indicated as such. So
yes, but sorry, but consultation with. Sorry, just so I make sure we deliver this for you properly.
Yeah, okay.
So who are we consulting with?
Well, I suppose the business
what?
park in presumably regular users of the road would need to know what we're proposing.
Well,
Okay.
if you make the order, they'll
receive the consultation as well as the farms.
Okay.
And
So
yeah, if we propose the order, they will receive all the
be
consultation.
a consultation,
Yeah.
obviously, in terms of the TRO. Yeah.
yes,
So as part of that consultation, all I'm saying is to give an indicative idea of layout, and then if there is representations, we can consider that when it comes back.
so if we include within the consultation on the traffic regulation order a complementary piece of information about the signage.
And quiet
And
quiet
on
lane,
road
because people
design,
say, what's a
that's fine, yeah.
quiet lane, you know, like. That's well, include that. Okay, thank you.
I suppose just going back to the one you raised about the parish council,
Mhm.
do you just want us to send the consultation of the order to the
Yeah.
parish council? Are you happy to make the order? And
Yes,
send
yeah,
that.
yeah.
So actually we can rewrite that piece and say, Councillor Tagore is happy to make the order, but he's asked that the consultation is additionally sent to the parish council. I think it goes.
It would all go, only go to the parish council as well.
Okay,
So you can just make that.
fair enough. I mean, obviously in this location, I don't know if there's a sort of management company for the business park, but some,
It's Northminster Business Park, isn't it? Right,
is it?
I think so, yeah.
I mean, presumably if there's not that many companies there, it's not going to be too onerous to inform them as well.
Should we be happy to move on to the next?
Yeah, next one is
North Lane, Huntington.
Huntington.
So it's a well, a few properties, access north. Near the junction of the 64 though, there is a stretch of some businesses. And it's recommended to reduce the speed limit in that area to 30 mile an hour.
Mhm.
And there's no street lighting, so then it'd be repeater signs along that section as well, so.
Mhm. So the 85th percentile is the left-hand bend as you're coming off. So going, so it's about the same east and west, isn't it? On that bend, but which is unusual. Would think it would be higher as people coming off that long straight stretch, but yeah. So that's to have a 30 mile an hour just from the main road to beyond, just beyond the bend, is that right? Yeah, I'm happy with that.
Intake Lane, Castamawis, another road, few properties, our access is fronting it. Somewhat direct route seems, and it's reasonable to assume that most users will be worthwhile familiar with the area. And you can't be that confident that a lower speed would be, wouldn't be ignored in that area as the drivers choose to travel. If they're familiar with the area, nature of the road environment, etc. So it's recommended to take no further action.
Was there a specific concern location? Because there seems to be a sharp kink in the road, isn't there, at one point? But
the area was just a reduction on intake lane, so it wasn't along the front of sort of where the caravan site and residential properties are. Was the main concern, but I
mean, I suppose the only thing to say is whether we can just check that there's appropriate signing for sharp bends or whatever. I'm happy with the recommendation, but if there's some, it's not an area I'm familiar with, but if there's a particular hazardous location, I did have a look on the accident statistics. I couldn't see any accidents in the last 5 years on that road.
So just happy with the recommendation.
Happy with the recommendation,
action, but review the
signage
in the area
that's appropriate to deal with a particular location. So I don't know what the concern was, but okay. So then we've got Temple Lane, Cotmanthorpe.
So the request was to extend the 40 mile an hour from the end of where the residential properties are coming out of Cotmanthorpe. So the junction with Afton Road, it's very lightly built up, speed limits, moving the limit to the junction, no urban indicators would likely lead to reduction. It's recommended that we take no further action here.
Okay, I mean, I suppose the only, so you're saying there's a short section before you get to the main road, whatever the road at right angles is. And presumably that is all 60 as well, beyond there, is it?
Beyond which we say?
The road that it joins with the T junction, that's 60 as well, yeah. Yeah, I'm happy with that. Seems to be.
Simbark Lane, so the request was to introduce 40 mile an hour, which between the village at Bishopthorpe and just south of the college, and to extend it. The officer recommendation is to agree and implement that and extend the current 40 that's in there.
Well, I should say on this one, I don't work at the college any longer, but all the years that I was there, it seemed an obvious one, but this should have happened a long time ago, to be honest, because it is such a short section over the flyover, over the dual carriageway. You know, as you say, you've got a 30 mile an hour quite close to the junction from the college. I mean, you've got, not sure, it might even be 20 as you go into Bishopthorpe. So this is recommending a 40 mile an hour, which is in accordance with the 85th percentile and the means that have been recorded there. So I'm happy to support those. I think it's important actually from a safety point of view. There's a lot of students live in Bishopthorpe and travel to the college along it. So that's what we do to improve safety is welcome.
So this is the A19 Chipson Road at Warcliffe. So
The only question I had on this is how far does in terms of the extent of the 40 mile an hour, how close does that come to the entrance to the park and ride site? Along here, because I'm aware that this obviously overlaps with the active travel route from the park and ride site along the A19, which was this was one of the measures that we wanted to see.
So the existing 40 mile an hour goes all the way up to the roundabout, so it goes past the entrance. The proposal is to extend the 30 mile an hour in the dark, which is shown by the two lines, the dark line from on the frontage of that more built up area. So it'll go up to just past where the old line of the A19 is, where the properties are set back on the access road.
And this, you don't, I mean, I suppose there's a lot of question marks in statistics, but the location you've got, the 30 mile an hour is existing 30, isn't it? At the bottom of the chart, and then the speeds in the 40 is the existing 40. So I suppose the question there is what additional measures, if the 85th percentile is not far off 40, what additional measures might we need to do to lower that to 30 if you're extending the 30 up to the point where there's 50% of frontages access onto the main road?
Well, currently they're compliant with the 40 mile an hour that's signed within that area. Would reduce.
So you think it would reduce with you would expect it to reduce with the change in the signing and the limit? Yeah, okay, I'm happy to agree that. I just think that's one we're going to have to be conscious of, making sure that the street environment reflects the speed limit, so that we can encourage compliance. Yep.
So the next location is Wellgate Lane. There's 30 mile an hour on Wellgate Lane as you come into Osbaldwick, and the recommendation is to extend that past further out to take in line with some properties that have been built in that area.
Right. So just looking on this plan, what's that? It says bowling house. Is that got a vehicle access onto the road?
Yeah. Those properties are all set back, so they wouldn't be included in this area. It's new residential. It's taking in line with new residential development nearer the junction of Elvington Lane. Goes 100 metres down.
Nice.
Give them better access coming out of there as they cross the road.
I see. So it's more related to that development to the north. Okay. Yeah, I'm happy with that one. Brian.
Askham Bryan, there was 2 locations here. The first one was the entrance access road into Askham Bryan from the A1237 Morway roundabout. Asking for 30 mile an hour. All the way into the village. It's unlikely that that will be complied with. The recommendation in that location is to extend the 30 mile by 100 metres, move it further away from the roundabout to reduce the speeds as people approach. And the second location was the other access into Askham Bryan from the roundabout with the A64, Partial Street lit and College, hence, so there's going to be signed for 30 mile an hour as well. Introduce a 40-mile per hour limit to extend the village 30 minute by 100 metres out towards the college.
Okay, yeah, so the site 2, it's moving the 30 mile an hour a little bit further away from the entrance to the playground, is that?
On that access road into the village, there's a playground right near the 30 mile an hour, so it's to move that 100 metres.
And then
south.
and then there'll be a 40 mile an hour extension to it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'm happy with those. We'll have to see. I suppose the only question I have is in terms of the recommendation for site 1, is that long enough? Because if objections come saying that we've not made it sufficiently extensive, if that's what they were asking for, would we be better to advertise the greater extent and then we can reduce it? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, if we advertise greater extent, you may still get the objections that we haven't gone further enough though, because obviously the request was to go to the village.
Right. But you think that the extent with which we're recommending is something which will achieve compliance?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go with that.
So the next location is at Deaton, the A19.
Mhm.
There's an existing 40 mile an hour past the village on that section. Very few properties actually front onto there. There's the pub and a few other residential properties. It's unlikely any further reduction will be complied with in this location.
So what was the request from this?
To extend, to reduce the 40 to 30 along the frontage of the Deaton.
Right. I see. Well, I actually had a look at this on Street View, and I can't imagine 30 mile an hour being complied with with the current design of that road. So I'm happy with your recommendation.
Next location is Neyburn.
Mhm.
And the recommendation is to extend the 30 mile an hour out of the village. This will go in line with the York Selby Cycle footway route in that section. And there's also an area within that stretch where we're looking to do some traffic calming measures through another scheme. So it'll work in line with that.
Okay, yes, I'm happy with this one. As you say, it is linked to a award scheme, I think, as well in the areas. Yeah.
So then moving on to Southwark, the request was to Southwark Road to reduce the speed limit to 30 from its junction with Shenfield Road down to the past second bend. Over the last 10 years, so what those farm buildings have been converted into residential holiday lets. So there's been increasing vehicle movements in and out of those properties. Recommendation is to implement a 30 mile an hour on that stretch.
Yeah, I'm happy with that one. Yeah.
And finally, the Revival Estate
Yes.
to introduce a 20 mile an hour on the whole estate.
Yeah, so I think this was subject to the petition, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Alongside the residence parking, which we dealt with earlier in the year. So yeah, I'm happy to approve this. It does seem consistent with with our approach across the city for 20 mile an hour. It's obviously not a through route, so there's less of a concern than there might be elsewhere, but nevertheless, it's for consistency. It makes sense for it to be 20 mile an hour. Is that all of them?
That's the Maya.
Yeah, I think my copy may have got them repeated, which makes it even thicker.
Yeah, I've got them. Hold on, just got to fix it.
That's a relief to find we haven't got to do them all again. So if we've moved, that concludes that item then. Move on, was it?
Conclude recommendations.
Mhm.
I think. Are you clear, Robert? What's been decided?
I think just going back to.
Yeah, just check.
So it's not so much option 1 and option 2 as it is, as it's put on the report. It's more we're going with the recommendation. So on page 1, 2, 3.
Well, we've gone through each one in
We've gone
turn,
through each
so
one.
yeah, we've got the
So
recommendation.
we've got a number of changes to Stockton Lane that we're going to do a review as to whether or not it should be 50. Northfield Lane, you're just going to include when the TRO goes out information on
Quiet lanes.
information on quiet lane signage. And it's a check on intake lane on appropriate signage. Other than that, all of them are as the officer recommendations are in the report.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that. Thanks for your time, Darren. So if we can move on then to item 10, which is the last mile delivery update.
Yeah. Morning, Chair. This is a follow-up from the paper that we took to executive in May 2021, which outlined a piece of work where we've been successful in securing some funding from DEFRA to undertake an air quality project, which was about last mile small parcel delivery. So if you recall from then, the project was broken into 2 phases, a feasibility study and a pilot project that would follow the feasibility study. So I think the first sort of point is the results of the feasibility study, which are in Annex A of the report. Significant amount of effort went into that from the consultant's perspective who supported us on this piece of work, which included a lot of engagement with businesses, on the spot engagement with delivery drivers, and it gave us an excellent starting point for an evidence base for the next stage of the process, which was the trial. Now, the part of the report was to identify some areas to recommend that we proceed with the trial. So they're numbered as per the feasibility report within the kind of cover report, but in brief, there's pedestrian portering, which is about intercepting parcels and having a foot delivery, pedestrian delivery offer with a trolley that will hold the parcels. The second one was what we termed zero emission delivery, which is largely cargo bikes, e-cargo bikes and small vehicle type offers like that. There was then an investigation into rail freight delivery, which we'd had a number of discussions on, and then the final one was around food and servicing restaurants and consolidating delivery of food, etc. Now, in terms of the trial, the recommendations around the pedestrian portering and the zero emission delivery is a combined thing, because the other two would probably be difficult to achieve within the timescales of the trial. So the food delivery one, for example, is quite complex, probably more complex than we'd achieve with the other two. And then the rail freight one is something that we're going to, or that we have engaged with the rail industry and freight operators on separately. So, which is why we've not brought that through as part of the trial. I think it's probably an important, just to respond to some of Councillor Melly's points on the subject. We will seek to monitor other benefits where we can as we undertake the trial. But it'll be difficult to, in terms of road use, road deterioration and things like that. We can do that through the annual survey, so we'll be able to bring those results through ultimately when we conclude the trial. There is an aspiration for operators to work together to create efficiencies. So we'll seek to do that as much as we can when we go into the pilot, with the caution that that some of that might be quite complex, but we're going to work through that in the next stage. We've engaged quite heavily around businesses and operators, and the next stage we'll re-engage with the operators and start to work through what the trial will look like. But there have been a number of small businesses that have approached us and talked about how we could help. I think one of the things Councillor Melly raised was about whether it can be a drop-off as well as delivery, and that will be entirely in the hands of the operators that are involved in the pilot. So that is all possible. And then I think to conclude on timescales, the timescales are indicative, but probably the key factor in it has been securing premises. So we've got some premises that we're proposing that we use, which are council premises. They're in a good location for the inner ring road. As I say, some of the small parcel delivery won't just be in the city centre, so access to inner ring road, etc., will be useful. And then probably final comment is around the work of partners who've helped us with this project. So I just wanted to acknowledge the work that York Civic Trust have done with us in terms of working, in terms of setting up and working the Freight Forum, and Sheffield University. They had one of their lecturers who's a specialist in freight and logistics, Professor Erica Ballantyne, has supported the Freight Forum. So we had very good engagement with large organisations, small organisations, and across sectors as well. So the recommendations in the report are to note the feasibility study, to approve a 9-month pilot in terms of the two scenarios that I've described, pedestrian portering and zero emission vehicles, to approve the principle of a 12-month lease, which we'll now work forward and secure in order for us to secure some premises for the trial. And then the last recommendation is just to delegate to Director of Environment, Transport and Planning to, when we agree some of the details, so we can enter into the trial.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of this lease of a premises, obviously initially that is for a 12-month period. Is it a council?
It is. It's one. We've obviously not got any agreement on it.
Obviously,
yet,
I mean, just in terms of a principle.
Yeah. So it's 107 to 109 Walgate. So you may be familiar with the line of retail premises on the left-hand side as you come through Walgate Bar. And there's we've had some of the operators view, and there's a view that it would be suitable for the van deliveries to there. Right. So a suitable launch pad for the zero emission importing services from there.
Okay. So I mean, the reason I was going to say is that during the course of the trial, presumably at some point, there'll be a review and a decision. If if things are working well, then presumably some negotiations could continue, could take place to extend the lease. If that seems to be the suitable premises.
I think that is what we'll do. I think there's two aspects to that. I think one of them is that we'll seek to see how we can replicate that elsewhere. If we're seeing significant gain through the pilot and other opportunities elsewhere, we'll seek to do that either with any residual funding we've got from DEFRA, or we'll come back for a decision if we need further funding. And the objective, or one of the objectives, is to see if we can generate a sustainable business model at that particular premise. So basically, there is the opportunity to extend beyond there. So one of the things that we may have to do initially is for these premises is seek planning for a change of use, which will obviously take a little bit of time, but we'll start that process immediately after this session. But
and on the basis of like fair competition, because obviously there'll be different providers. It's open to any interested party to get involved. Obviously, you'll have some people already involved. But
I think one of the challenges will be how the operators work together. I think that's one of the challenges, and one of the reasons that we're proposing that effectively the premises are sort of managed by us and then used by the operators is it then doesn't tie the premise to the operators. If the operators at any point during the trial, for whatever reason, can't continue with the trial, it means that the premises aren't attached to them. Okay. So there's a number of things, but there is, what I would say is that there is quite a bit of detail to work through in the next 3 months. To answer Councillor Melly's question, is it going to be challenging to do it in the 3 months? I think it's possible, starting from the point of the decision, to work through that detail with the operators. But obviously there could be risks around the premises, planning, the main risks around the operators. If we can't find arrangements within which the operators can operate, then obviously we'd have to reconsider how the trial worked.
Right. Well, it all sounds very exciting and encouraging. As you know, we regularly discuss the constraints of a tight city centre and issues such as the historic lamp. Incidents like that have happened in the past. So the more that we can provide at least a test bed for increased freight delivery, last mile delivery, and that's certainly something I think the city is going to welcome and benefit from, and I look forward to seeing the outcome of your work. So thank you. I'm happy to approve the recommendations as you've got on paragraph 6.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. So that moves us on, not least, to agenda item 11, maximising the use of Yorkshire Park and Ride sites with a review of on-street parking.
Do you want to?
Well, I'll just ask you to cover it. I'll hand over to David just a second. I'm just going to say it follows on from the budget decision that this links to. So this is taking the budget decisions that full council made and trying to give some thought to how they could be given effect.
I think what I'd probably start with, we've received a number of representations about this since the papers were published. So I just want to reiterate that what the work we would do would be to scope out what the trial would look like at this stage. So it's not, what I'm asking you today is not to approve a trial, but we'll bring that to you a bit later on in the year. And I think in terms of Knavesmire Road as a location, within parking services, we've done some work to analyse where some of the hotspots were for commuter parking based on the civil enforcement officer's experience. and some of the roads that were hotspots subject to potential other pieces of work, such as active travel projects on the A19, bus priority corridors and things like that. So that may well affect the parking on some of those other streets as well. So Knavesmire Road was one of those, what was a street that didn't have those conditions associated with it. However, you know, we're not going to go into this in terms of the detailed work blind to some of the issues that we've encountered in the past in this geographic location. And probably another thing to emphasise is it doesn't have to be a single zone of parking charges. It could be broken up. But what we're keen to explore is what the possibilities are through that scoping exercise, and then bring back to you later in the summer, in early autumn, options around running the track. Conscious that obviously this was a line.
So presumably that would include sort of surveys to see what sort of parking is taking place there, and you know, because I'm aware that is quite regularly used for coach parking, for instance. You know, presumably if you dropped the party off in the city centre, and you know, so there's different types of users, maybe commuters and so on. And given the title of this paper about promoting the use of York's Park and Ride, I think we need to have carrots as well as sticks. So we do need to talk to the operator about what incentives we might offer as well. So, you know, if say for sake of argument this went ahead, we might want to make sure that there's offers, promotions that are put out to attract people who are parking here at the moment to try out the alternatives, rather than parking in neighbouring streets, which is obviously a concern for a lot of residents who live in the area. So I'm happy with the recommendation as it is to explore it further as an idea, but also to look at other options that might be part of that package. So, I mean, just for the sake of example, I'm aware that some of the more recent traffic restrictions on Bishopthorpe Road, which is just on the other side of the racecourse, have been introduced that restrict parking on one side of the road in the morning, one side of the road in the afternoon. So it's sort of flexible for people who need to park in the area, but it discourages all day parking. So there may be other options as well as charging that could be part of the solution we want to bring forward. So I would also think we need to be conscious of the fact that there is going to be work on Tadcaster Road in the not too distant future for major maintenance and active travel package to be delivered there, and that may well be the point at which we want to particularly encourage people to use the park and ride rather than add some congestion while that work is taking place. So with that, I'm happy to approve continuing work on this in consultation with ward councillors or other interested groups like the racecourse and so forth, to come back with some more detailed proposals before it's actually implemented. So with that, I don't have any urgent business, so I'm happy to conclude the meeting.
Very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.